big idea. The reason that I share content is because I've had results in my life that have proven now to be sustainable and have changed my entire experience of just day-to-day living. And how I see it in my mind is that basically I pulled all of my thinking and believing from the inside, I pulled it inside out. So when you read a lot and when you apply and you start paying attention to, different books and resources that are sharing tips and ideas and research as far as how to manage depression, that was my thing, how to live in a balanced state, these things. These books, one commonality between some of this content that I would read was that the author would maybe be a scientist or some type of academic, and or not. Tony Robbins has had a lot of success, and I don't think he's a college graduate, but they study people that have had success in certain areas. So if you think of money and happiness, they study as far back as they can in the history of people that have had success leading people that have had success with wealth, people that have had success in some defined term of happiness, and they study their patterns. So like Stephen Covey in 7 Habits studied the patterns of successful leaders throughout time. So, and then these books that do sustain the test of time, like 7 Habits, it makes you very curious about that content. Why is it lasting over these generations? So there's that. So one thing that is linked and that made sense to me was if you can align with the natural laws of existence. And that's, I think, why Stephen Covey's book is so effective, because those habits are aligned with these natural occurring laws of energy. So if you take the bell curve, and I got interested in the bell curve because I was listening to the book, The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee this summer, and she said that the graph of the economy should look like a football, but it looks like a bow tie. And that visual made sense to me. I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. We're polarized. And that connected to my own sense of like well-being, and my content and self-care is this like inverting your thinking, right? So living and getting back into your inside world instead of reacting to the outside world. And I have to give Abraham Hicks a lot of props for my effective outcomes. But it's an interpretation of collective consciousness, and not everybody's into that. But that was really a big shift in my own personal shifts. So bell curve, basic bell curve, normal distribution. You have 100 people, and so here's a law of existence, oppositional forces. So you take hot and cold. So of this 100 people, you're going to have 1 to 3 that favor the ends, 12 to 15 that are kind of in the middle, and then you have this nice majority that are able to work together and make, compensate when they're in a situation maybe that doesn't, they'll bring a sweater in this case if they happen to be over on one of, you get it. Okay, so, and the interesting thing with this idea of hot and cold is intensity. So these extremes, because when you talk about like school of violence, the intensity of a mass shooter coming into a school building, that's bad. So if we're gonna have extremes, could we have extremes but lessen the intensity of those extremes? So maybe a student brings a gun to school. That's the extreme. So, or maybe like when it comes to then the opposing, like the death by suicide, you have like homicide, you have suicide. Maybe the intensity of suicide is the ideology, the thinking of suicide, right? So if you think there's going to be extremes, but what about the intensity? Could we lessen the intensity of the extremes? So like here, I can't read my backwards handwriting, but I base it like fire and ice. Like people that are on the extremes of heat and cold, it's not like they like to live in fire or they like to live in ice. There's a variance of that on the ends. So that's the basic bell curve, but now think of that as an inverted bell curve. So now you have 2 to 6 people of 100 that like it warm, and then you have this group, but then you have these 2 on the ends, and basically it's a polarized graph. And if you think about that, I was considering like money and happiness. When we equate money with happiness, I think this can happen because we have like an external view of what's going to make us happy versus this idea of well-being and your own self-care. So caring about yourself. So what if, so this green, I'm using this school method or this school curriculum zones of regulation. The green zone is when kids are in a regulated state. So your state of well-being is a regulated state. You're a problem solver, you can access a broader view, you're a better listener, you're active in your own life. You're aware of your thoughts, feelings, urges, impulses, and you're aware of your desired outcomes that you want. You make choices to fit your desired outcome versus reacting to the stimulus, to the environment. So imagine this as well-being, the green zone. And you only stumble out here. So the blue zone represents the shutdown or the fight, flight, faint, freeze. So that playing dead survival mode or the shutdown, freeze, survival mode. This would represent fight, flight. So you think of these extremes and you think of these as like indicators in your body of when you're starting to sense that your nervous system is kicking on as far as how you're interpreting a situation, circumstance, or event. And then here you're in this regulated state. So think about like a day. How much time are you spending in the green zone, in a regulated state? This is always going to happen because it's the intelligence of our nervous system. So you're always going to have indicators because it helps your focus. And now and then you're going to bounce into these extreme states. But I'm wondering if this is meant to be how we're meant to live versus this inverse where you're only in this regulated state for this low percentage. And then you spend time in these extremes. And there's a variance of that extreme. And I'd have to play with this a little bit more. So let's see if I can make the connection here to well-being and happiness. When we start to be curious about our inside world of thoughts, feelings, urges, and impulses, and we start to orient towards our feeling state being the indicator of our happiness and well-being, we start to care more about our thoughts, feelings, and the stories they tell. And we start to recognize our time spent in this state is a better indicator of how we are effectively doing our day, as opposed to external conditions, which oftentimes can be connected to money because you can measure it. So when let's just use that as an example, and not everybody's into money, but money can represent an external condition dictating your level of happiness. So money, we don't have, it's the basis of it can be based on behavior and action. And behavior and action is situational, I guess. And I'm going to stop talking about that because I've lost my train of thought on that. Let's just leave it at a curiosity about this bell curve. A curiosity about, so internally being curious about this regulated state and learning skills tools and strategies to live from this regulated state. And then as a part of a whole, an organism of the whole, a social being, what would it be like if this was our, the way we interacted with one another, where we could have opposing views, but we could be in this majority where we can have conversations and not this extreme polarity where like the Dr. Seuss Sneetches, like where we're just fighting with each other while life's passing us by. Thanks for watching. This is Unedited, and there will be a edited reel and very popular TikTok.